Okay, let's do this. How does the temporary lion roar in the eternal existence? How does language become our identifications with this phenomena of the world? Today is a very special episode because I am, in some sense, speaking about a concept I've developed, and I consider it the personality simulation. And so, the way I kind of look at life, these talks mainly tend to focus on life because that seems to be what there is. We start off with being sight, and as the eyes of the child open, this sight becomes the child's existence. This is unavoidable. You know, if your eyes are open in this world, you exist. Okay, there is existence of some sort. As the eyes of the child have opened to a sort of sight, it will find that this sight is all that it has. This sight is the limits of its knowing of its existence. Your sensory perception is being you right now. Your sensory perception is creating an atmosphere where the data from your senses can move to a subjective consideration of the self. This subjective consideration of the self, some people called it ego. Some people, in some sense, could not name it, but they knew it was the idea of the self entertained in the moment. So think of it this way: as throughout the years you've been growing, you've been, in some sense, blowing birthday candles on every birthday cake. There has been an awareness within you that has considered it is still you, even though your physical body has changed, even though your ideas have changed. The you that remains seems to be not just a product of your memory, but your memory seems to be your past existence preserved in some sense, as if, how can I tell you? As if it's there. We're stepping, we're going over we're stepping over stones to cross a river, and in some sense, these stones are various senses of self that we pass through. In the metaphor that I'm using. So Heraclitus, this ancient, I believe, Greek philosopher, he has this saying, which is very nice. He says, "No man can step in the same river twice, and it is not the same river, and it is not the same man." You know? And so that's a very important suggestion because it brings novelty into the story of your life. The fact that you wake up and you consider it's a new day, if you're defined by who you were yesterday, how can it be a new day? You see? That our forgetfulness is as divine as our memory. We don't realize it. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is 4 billion years of evolution have not just made us into objective phenomena. We're not just objective beings. There's something that's brewing in this objective existence. And you can say it is the conscious explorer, the observer within. I want to kind of suggest that the person is made up of two dimensions to their moment, the subjective aspect of their moment and the objective aspect. The objective aspect seems to be the cause, seems to be the effect, and the subjective aspect seems to be the cause. Because we have not pursued any, because the mainstream, the global community in some sense has not overall searched for the deeper senses of self. It's as if like we saw as much of the world as we could and we bordered it. So similarly, we have explored through the knowledge of the world to a certain range, we have explored into the unknown, and we have extracted, we have in some sense placed banners of conditional acceptance. We have accepted the conditions of life. The child opens its eyes. The world is here. This world that is here is an occurrence of sight. I have called it in other talks the great happening. It's a happening. It's something that's happening, and you're a sight here. Okay? First thing I find that the advanced communicator and the pilot of consciousness requires is a contentment with the space. You cannot navigate what you are not uh, when you're not adjusted to the settings. Okay, the pilot has to know what he's doing, or in some sense, that plane of existence will falter, will fail and fall off the altar of its perfection. What I'm trying to tell you is if before you drive a car, you need to be acquainted to the car, okay? So now I'm saying before we navigate our plane of existence, that's why I am so drawn by the concept of a pilot. When I was young, I was fascinated by pilots, and in some sense, I thought there was only one kind of pilot on this planet, and this is one of those things I feel I came into existence for. Um, the inner pilot, the pilot of the conscious moment. This pilot does not have hands. This pilot needs no hands. This sort of piloting is, in some sense, recognizing that the moment is like two sides of a cone. In one way, the world is shaped into various different personalities. You're a person, the other person is a person, everybody else is a person. So suddenly the world has been changed into individual blocks, as if like the cake has been cut up into many pieces, and each piece of the cake is like, I fit into the puzzle, but I just want to live my own life. And it's this very unique situation that's happening on the surface of this planet. I find after living like I think 25 years, I will give it that number, for 25 years of the life of the individual, perhaps for some sooner, for some later, but for in the first 25 years of life, you have to get acquainted with your world, your own world. After you have been acquainted with your own world, and in some sense been introduced to the world of others, you have to, in some sense, the sense of self shifts through an experience of the moment in a way where you suddenly see you're not alive for just one part of your moment of being. You're alive for all of it. It is the roar of totality, the roar of the ultimate. It's not a oneness. It's not like a new age kind of kumbaya moment oneness. Everybody love and happiness are going to save us. Love and happiness, I'm sorry, they are not the generals in the war. They are lieutenants. You know, there are ideas that serve, but in the war of man with a changing world, pretty much what's happening is like it's one chemical is called eternity, one chemical is called temporality, and these two are chemically reacting all the time. What that means is that man's mind oscillates between experiencing itself as a field of intelligence. That's when you can use the word mind, I believe, and then it oscillates as being a body that's projecting a mind. So, in some sense, you can say the mind falls in love with the body in such a way that the body never questions what it is. And you're going to see busy people never have time to ask questions. You see, that's the issue. You know, you want to limit somebody's knowledge. In some sense, keep them busy. You see, that's I find that's the show. That's this kind of like childish act our civilization is doing. We have an obsession for self because we understand the self as an idea. Because we have an obsession for ourselves and for the idea of ourselves, our life becomes based on that design. I wanted to just say this suggestion that instead of most people on this planet, they feel they're going from imperfection to perfection. Something's not right, work hard, do what you need to do, and you'll get there, buddy. You know, like there's that sort of imperfection going to perfection. Now, I am not in any way in these talks trying to devalue hard work, but I cry for hard work when it is blind. That means I remember this when I was really young in my cottage in Iran, in our cottage, which was a big, big field. On this big field, there were certain people doing construction and working, and I remember me and my brother wanted to build a tree house. So my father told this new employee to help me and my brother build the tree house. This employee builds the tree house, okay? Builds the whole like not doesn't build sorry, doesn't build the tree house, but starts laying out a sophisticated structure and everything, to somehow build the tree house. Now, what happens is my father comes along to check on what's going on with the treehouse and all this, and he tells this kind of new person to the workforce. He says, he's my father. It's like me and my brother heard my father, but he misheard it. I'm just telling you this. This is how hard work can be blind. I'm telling you an example of this. This man, this man heard suddenly my father say, it's my father told him, take this one stick you've placed on this part of the tree and it's not going to help you. So my father was giving him like a adjustment, telling him to just take off this one stick, but him, for some reason, he thought he had to take off all the sticks. So he thought he had to get rid of the treehouse. And my father came back, and I remember me and my brother were really young. We were just shouting at this guy, "Don't do this, man! Don't do this!" And so it was that moment where, because the guy misunderstood the data, he, in some sense, his hard work was destined to failure. So what I'm trying to tell you in some sense is that the issue was eventually my father came in. It's like, hey man, why would you? Why? How does it make sense that I'm telling you to help build this tree house, and suddenly you feel everything you have built you have to take off, you know? And it became a strange kind of thing. Like the guy misunderstood. However, there was a sort of like me and my brother were like very like startled by the whole thing, overwhelmed by the whole thing. But my father stood there and he was like, "It's okay," And I'm trying to give you this mentality that there's going to be a lot of inefficiency on this civilization, and the species hasn't woken up yet. This waking up is not the new age kind of community waking up. I'm saying I'm not trying to feed into this culture of awakened people going, what is this? I mean, I understand, but what it's like you're doing it's a subtler ego. Somebody thinking they see more than everything that's here. You're a sweet man, but a fool. You see, it was very hard because there is like think of it this way. I remember I was my grandfather asked me about my view and I shared my view with him. And I told him, as the child is born, the moment your eyes open, waves of data hit you, waves of various experiences hit you. And when you look, actually, when you look into people's eyes, do you know? Like, really, when you're talking to them, when you look at their eyes, most people, let me tell you, unfortunately, due to insecure notions of a social self, many children on this planet will not communicate their inner realities. Okay, pretty much somebody has to go make mistakes so others are like, holy shit, we can also make mistakes, you know. And these mistakes in a mistaken world, sometimes when you make a mistake, you know, like once, like think of it this way. Imagine somebody in a good world where an evil system has taken over it. A member of that evil system suddenly makes a mistake that's not evil, okay? And suddenly sees it falls on the other side, as if like the mistakes of evil are good. But the mistakes of the good are evil. Do you see what I'm trying to tell you? Life is kept projected by your mind very uniquely by dualities. These dualities you don't understand. It's very fascinating. It's just like how many dots become a line, how many lines become in some sense, a plane. Okay, so in some sense, the dot replicates itself, then the line replicates itself, then the plane replicates itself, and then we begin to see the generation of higher dimensions. So you see, sometimes there's two ways to enlightenment, and that's why I'm giving these talks, because I feel one way is, of course, you got to respect the yogis, the rishis, the sadhus, the dervishes, you know, the Zen masters. You got to respect them. They found a way out, but they found a way out that does not apply to the civilization's mentality. That means, as if like the difference between me and my ancestors is that when my ancestors looked at the world, their collective responsibility was limited because society had not evolved. You see, we have never had an opportunity to see what 8 billion efficient beings can move like. And so what is our burden is that I have said in other talks, language is the skin of the ego. So what that means is the sense of self is kept linguistically. That's why you have a name. Okay, your name is your linguistic self. Okay, is a part of it. Then goes to the story of your name, and you see one of the most important things, if anybody was to write a story right now, would be the names of the characters. And it's very interesting because the name you give a child, trust me, that's the first word they're gonna learn. Like, you know, if somebody names their child greatness, you know, like, guess what? That kid's gonna at some point in his life think about greatness, you see? And I find it's very unique. Whatever comes in the scope and conscious study of man instantly gets categorized. So let me tell you, the reason why perhaps many extraterrestrials, not many, like what I'm trying to entertain is that if there wasn't, if like Fermi's, we looked at Fermi's paradox and we wondered, where is everybody? Like, how are we, the human beings that are just here? And I'm thinking, what if all the planets were populated, but suddenly all the planets decided to leave? Do you see? Oh, sorry, not the planets. All the civilizations on the various planets decided to leave. You know, and in some sense, we look at it and we are saying it's empty. It's as if somebody with sunglasses looking at the stars and wondering why it's dim. Why they don't shine so bright, you know. Sometimes this requires a skill that people are born with naturally, I am convinced, because I try to see, like, I try to in some sense analyze this behavior in others. Sometimes it's very easy to be a sort of to have a sort of psychological study of the moment. What that means is you want to see, let's say, like the scientist had the Higgs boson to do an experiment on. What the psychologist has is how the unknown mind generates known behavior. And when somebody's mind generates behaviors, patterns that we cannot comprehend, it's as if they are on a boat and the boat is moving in the ocean and we are on the land and we're like, buddy, we see you, but we can't do anything. You're in your own world. And so when we look at these 8 billion beings on this planet, we recognize how important language is. Language is our intelligence, how we moved language, how we sequence symbols, and in some sense, through the acceleration of attention through many forms, a movie projects. As I speak, like, look at how fascinating it is. Behind my eyes right now, as I'm speaking to you, I'm in the room, in the invisible room of imagination, where somehow you can imagine something, but it won't appear in front of you. So in that invisible room where the subconscious designs of imagination are accessible, let me tell you a problem with knowledge. If it believes itself, it will not see the world anymore. In this life, my dear listeners, in this life, you are either in your mind or you are in the world. This is so important. This is so important because we choose to think the exploration starts as if, imagine the scientist, did an experiment in every moment of his life. Every moment of his life, that scientist was like, forget everything, every phenomenon, every movement I do is an experiment. Okay, let's say I'm analyzing, studying it like an experiment. Eventually, that person would see it requires a whole lifetime. So, in some sense, what we notice about our human beings immediately is that their intelligence originates from what we at first consider within them towards without. That means I'm sleeping on my bed, I wake up, I look at the clock, I run out the door. So that is, in some sense, in one moment, data has restructured. The sense of self is restructured by the data. Even a lot, you won't understand it, how much your personality changes, not by just your conscious will. If you sat and meditated and looked at your whole life and got new values over the whole thing, like it's like every environment you step into, because you have every person has this. It's like the urge. It's the ultimate evolutionary urge, which is to continue, as if something was here and something's like, okay, I want to stay. All right. The mind can be only the soul, or it can be only the body. It is a bridge between various states that you oscillate between. Just like how you open your eyes, like your eyes are open right now, and then suddenly you blink, and then you open your eyes, and then you blink. Do you know? I don't know how to say it, guys, but it's like, imagine people in all around the world. They went to all those people who not all their senses were intact. Imagine a blind person or a deaf person, and found all those in that realm who could communicate. Okay, who could communicate. I would, in some sense, say, if the whole world took this approach and we asked those who we considered blinder than us, like actually people who were blind. It's the imagination responds to the senses. If one of the senses is altered, or pretty much as life impacts you throughout this lifetime, you get changed. As you get changed by various experiences, your mind is constantly reshifting the data it has of itself. So therefore, eventually you'll realize, if you think your thought is you, if you think right now, like as I'm speaking to you right now, the only way socially and culturally we can communicate it, or the only way we can communicate something to the tribe, is in some sense, how would I say it, is through language, but language is just the fingers that point to the stars. They're not the actual thing. I'm getting too many thought spikes. um, I find that when we ask a child, like a young kid, what is imagination to you? And you truly listen to their answer, you will see it is a way the world hasn't been restricted yet. Okay? So in some sense, children, their sight is like this pure, free clay, and then this pure, free clay, eventually, as it gets introduced to phenomena, it's like your mind wakes up on this plane of existence. Trust me, it's kind of strange, because when we wonder about our intelligence, it's like a tunnel. It's a series of tunnels. Okay, and so what these tunnels are, subjective tunnels. That means ideas you have to acknowledge, because they are like sometimes, okay, we think right now matter is leading to consciousness. Okay, but there have been times, if you look at history, it's been like a sine wave. It's been up and down, up and down. There's been civilizations, they thought they were just purely materialistic entities. There were civilizations that existed that thought they were opposite. They were just pure consciousness. That means the ancient Egyptians felt just they were the light beam of the sun. That's why they worshipped it, because they were it. Okay? And of course, there's too many stories about Egyptians being enslaved, so there's more. you know, uh, I don't know that much about ancient Egypt to give too much comments again, but you can say consciousness is the space where matter is having a value in. And when we look at this value, it's either a story. Let me tell you, um, any advanced technology, if they brought a technology from the future to us, let's say a time traveler came from the future here and brought like some gizmo that in some sense was like, oh my God, this gadget was like beyond us, we would in some sense feel like, hey man, that's magic. So if you went and showed your iPhone to, like, through a time machine to like your great 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 grandfather, he'd be freaked out. He'd be like, what is this? This is magic. This is not real. you know their faith would break. What I'm trying to say is, I find our species collectively, I'm speaking on behalf of what I consider to be all of us, okay, how every being is like this. And this is, of course, a very bold claim. You don't have to listen if you don't like it. But a temporary individual objective being has nowhere left to be inspired towards an eternal, unconscious, in some sense, collective action. So we are thinking of ourselves as static moments of a form of a life. You're considering yourself as a life form right now. So how are you keeping the form? What is the x and y axis, xyz axis of this form, this phenomena that you are subjectively? So I'm in some sense, Mr. Within is asking you, have you ever wondered about the axis of the universal axis of your philosophies on life, your major philosophy, your principal philosophy? And it has to do with how gifted you were as a child to process data. So in some sense, life is kind of cool because everybody has a unique DNA. Everybody is like a unique puzzle piece to their moment. You know, if the puzzle moves and finds the right part, the right piece, you gotta find how your mind is not just drawing the world to itself, but how it's drawing the world. That's when mysticism becomes a modern day activity. It becomes a quality you're observing and noticing about how the world is behaving. Because how the world is behaving has to do with how you are being and how you're having things. You see, the concept of having comes to an individual, but the concept of being doesn't is not necessarily individual. So there's ways that intelligence can be present where it is non-conceptual, and you might think that's chaotic because your orders, your ideas, what else can you know? But you see that there is, that's why in Zen, they understood something. They found the gate of paradise. It was the present moment. Heaven's gate is right here. It is the here prior to Earth's definition. It's that moment where you realize you were a child who didn't know how to speak. So you were looking at life purely, a purity that did not have the subjective technology, any linguistic, you didn't have ideas on the world. You were just pure sight. This pure sight, as it was engaged with, came to exist in higher dimensions. You see, it's as if we don't give our ancestry enough credit, but they raised our minds from the dirt into a subjective ability to pilot our attention. Language is the world of the identity because the thought of you, which is your identity, is existent based on a story, and stories exist through language. What other way do you have a story? You can't just write like a series of numbers and be like, hey guys, read my novel. It's just all numbers from the beginning to the end. You know, it's like the irrational book, and it's like, you know. Okay. Sorry, guys, I was just writing something down. So pretty much, it's this strange situation, this life, where we're on a rock physically, on a rock in the middle of nowhere. The conditions for our survival are very unique. So life is at the brink of, death and hope, And so pretty much we are based on the design of the universal sector. We find ourselves as evolutionary creatures who have come to a point in their history where they are wondering about the true nature of this evolution. As they do, they tap into the field of intelligence, which is a non dual, non conceptual presence of being. It's like how the universe is present before the world was here. Okay, and so you in some sense find yourself at the edge of the mind of the universe, at the edge of the universe, the mind's universe, or in some sense at the edge of the mind of God. And so when you find yourself there, you come back to a state where it's like the writer who's written so many words, which has been his whole free will throughout this lifetime. Imagine every action you've done can be written in a book. Imagine there was some robot watching you throughout your lifetime, just this sphere hovering above your head that was recording, in some sense, turning it into a book. It was like recording your whole autobiography, and it was like at the end of it, its purpose was to give you a book, and that book was like what you passed on. And so this sort of field of intelligence, in ancient Greek they called it the logos. It's kind of badass when you think about it, that these ancient philosophers did not just walk in a world where the gods were walking on the clouds like the ancient Greek philosopher. Typical philosopher would walk on the streets. Let's say he'd go to the streets of Athens and then look at the skies and wonder if the gods were watching him over from the clouds, from on top of the clouds. And at the same time, the ancient philosophers acknowledged the logos, which was the inner guiding voice. So one can say that I personally believe this: the imaginative need for evolution, that means our ancestors had more of a reason to intensely explore what the imagination was. Okay? So, because they didn't have technology. They did not have a lot of their inner realities externalized. So they were in some sense went deep into their inner realities. That means if me and you somehow could go back in the day and listen to Socrates, imagine his actual podcast, like there was, and so we listened to Socrates and we suddenly saw like what he would say how life was would be at a point where me and you in the audience like would just be like, whoa. Because the imagination was more savage. You see, it's not just the physically we have become more civil. This civility arises from how the mind holds the world, and it has learned to hold the world more, not only lovingly but efficiently. Sometimes it's the life is not about love, it's about efficiency, because efficiency is the response to the why not question in philosophy. Pretty much this philosophy teacher wrote a question on an exam, which was why, why question mark. Many kids gave an answer. None of one of them got it right. Eventually they went to the teacher and said, like, what's the answer? And the teacher told that kid to say it to all of them, and the teacher said, that kid stood up and said the answer is why not. It's putting a mirror over the in front of the question. It is a reflection. It's a symmetrical subjective reflection. Okay, so that's the why not. So atheists see doubt because they so purely and clearly see religious ideas, like like how can I tell you? It's like um, the unjust cannot be just. Okay, but the just cannot be unjust, and all children are just. You see, so the nature of man is it has more his philosophical subconscious layout of the world. Um, pretty much we're 8 billion moments of being. Each moment of being, we can say objectively in a sensory based way, is this spherically endless awareness. Okay, that means you are acknowledging you are the space of your body, right? That means inside your body you consider that's your you, right? The organs in your body, you consider that's you, right? That's your body. This physical body is you. Okay, this skeleton with organic matter is you. Okay, you acknowledge that the space where those particles are existing to be you. Okay, so in some sense the mind, as it in some sense advances through its own authentic self-inquiry, what occurs, it gives itself access to all data. So as if there was this warrior who all the warriors came to realize he was the greatest in the battlefield because he shouted, he said, all the warriors that are fighting for the good, attack me. And he said, all the warriors that are fighting for the bad, attack me. And this warrior roared in such a way that at first the whole battlefield started running at him. That means the two armies forgot their war and they all ran at this guy. And the moment they ran, and they just saw this guy just in some sense laughing, in some sense, they suddenly recognized that it's the prior position. Your confidence is, there's no solution to it. Let me tell you, it is based on the design of the self in childhood, and you will follow old designs until you design a new view. Okay, Lao Tzu has this saying where he says something like, you got to let go of who you are now to really be who you are. It's kind of like you got to let go of who you think you are right now. You got to relax on the conviction about truth, as if most people, the way they acknowledge truth is they want to grab it, like, grab the collar of truth and be like, show me. There's a quote from Rumi, this very profound quote, which hopefully I can remember the whole thing. He says, I was a mineral and I became a plant. I was a plant, then I rose to animal. I was an animal and I became man. When was I less from dying? You know? Why should I fear death? When was I less by dying? I shall die as man once more, to soar with angels, and then from there I shall move on to where no mind has ever conceived. This dude saw his evolution in existence beyond conception, literally. And of course, Rumi is a being whose poetry is so eternal that I feel he can never die. I see him. I see him through his language. You see, language is, we don't use it. We should use it like those martial art masters we see in movies who have complete harmony with nature and all the elemental forces, you know. Like we should seek a playful, egotistic mastery. We just to see, okay, let's see what happens. I feel that's the healthiest ego, you know. But of course, being also mindful of data, you know. In life, many human beings, data hits them and they react. It's so easy. That means when I see a person get angry, I see a person who's unaware of who they are. When a person gets angry, you see how easy it is for them to reduce their intelligence. Anger is not intelligent. It might be necessary in a chaotic world, but it is in a not chaotic world, it is not necessary. Sogyal Rinpoche, the Zen master, he says something very profound. He says, until you conquer anger, until you get rid of anger, all your enemies will be inexhaustible. Until you, if you don't fix an inner condition, trust me, the outer hell will find you everywhere. That's the problem. Okay, that's the problem. How we are working with a linear story of life. You see, if somebody asks, like, what is this on the table, you know, and imagine if somebody was here and they'd say, like, other than me, and they'd kind of look at it and they'd see it's like this, you know, whatever. They say some. Okay, here, let me say it like this. An object is on a table, okay? One person looks at that object and their mind generates a momentary wave of expressive phenomena. It's as if like it's a wave. It's like the waves hit the shore. That instant impact is the data of how you're interpreting reality. So what I'm trying to say is that we can get two people looking at the same thing, but in some sense what we find is that that thing is no longer the same thing if two people see a different thing. So what I mean by that, the Buddha had this notion of the nature of objective phenomena being empty. Oh my God. I honestly believe a glass of orange juice with ice cubes can bring world peace. It will relax the mind. Just like a person cannot choose how their body would look like, that you cannot choose how the conditions of life, all of it, happen. The conditions that you can actually change is the domain of your free will. Your domain of free will extends to your ability. Your ability extends to confronting the greatest challenge, which means fear was telling you not to go, and you're like, fear, why are you talking? You don't know what you're saying, and you just keep going. You know, it's a notion of a multidimensional intelligence that your mind brings, because the DNA's purpose is to generate thoughts. You know, the DNA is the machine of thoughts. Okay, that's modern. That's the secular society. Here's a good idea for the secular idea society. Somebody can go share it. But I feel the mind has depth. this depth, a part of it is unknown. Just like how you don't think about your heart, it beats. So you see, you don't necessarily need to have thoughts to move the body. So how does the body move? The body moves as the moment considers it is a point of observance. That means you stop. The point of meditation was, guys, meditation is a universal idea. There's no, don't think you have to go to only India to understand meditation. There is a unique culture that has approached it in a unique way. But meditation is any moment the being stops what they're doing. Physically, you just sit still and silent. There's no idea, there's no instruction, just sit. And in this stillness and silence, as the senses slowly stop moving, you begin to see the purpose of a stationary moment is there is no journey. The moment is. So the moment you stop being active, you notice there is a sort of active intelligence watching that inactivity. In ancient Vedanta, there was a very incredible story, a very beautiful, like magnificent metaphor. I consider this to be one of the most incredible metaphors. You know, if there was a museum of language and words could be kept in this museum. The various avenues that thought moves. As the body, a vast amount of it is involuntarily present, you kind of realize this hilarious thing that life doesn't need your ideas at first. You feel it's so big, this universe, and we're just an expression of this universal sector at first as we look at it. So because we're an expression of the universe, we are in some sense limited to the world we're in. Okay, and the reason I say the world we're in, it's as if we were of the world, then we made our evolved into a subjective kind of acknowledgement that we're in a world. When we thought we are in a world, the mind, in some sense, somehow in a subjective dimension, I entertain Rene Descartes' dualism here, that in some sense the mind's own dimension, uh, it, it's as if we evolved. There was a subjective evolution, but they don't teach it, they don't talk about it, because it is very hard to remind. What is hard is that it's all easy. It's all, there's a simplicity of no meaningness. It's like nothingness is uh, the space for something. Everything is, it doesn't come from nothing, it is held by nothing, if it even considers it something. So we find we don't have just an atmosphere, one atmosphere, like not just even the stratosphere and the other atmospheres, but I'm saying, but not just the earth's atmosphere, okay, but what is beyond the earth's atmosphere is an atmosphere of emptiness. It's empty, but I'm saying, how can I tell you? It's like it's empty because it's not here. It's like we are a simulation. We are a simulation, not a simulation of just a linguistic simulation of a self. We are not just a personality simulation, but all sensory data can be hypothesized to, in some sense, be like how the roots of the tree are in the soil and we can't see any further. Okay, when we went looking for the roots of existence, we saw it as a non-existence. Holy shit, what do we do? You know, and so in that moment, we have to come into immediate contentment and constant study, as if it's like your ancestors never failed if you do something about it. In some sense, the future breathed well because we recognize it makes no sense to cover uh, living phenomena with non-living phenomena. Okay? So for me, human beings should stop building roads immediately, you know? You know, and some people in villages are going to be like, what the fuck? But I'm telling you, it's very important that the attention of the whole society does not come to an instruction. There's no booklet we're passing around for everybody to become enlightened, okay? It's like that game is so weird that I don't want to even talk, you know? I don't know how data, oh my God, I don't want to get into it. But what I'm trying to say is that the roots of the mind hold the body, but then the roots of objective reality hold the subjective imagination. So you find this sort of symmetrical mirror-like effect. You know, you see that behind the eyes of a person is a space of awareness of various ways that phenomena can move. For me, if you want to study your life, but you don't have the time for anything. Let's say you're the most busiest person on the world, and regardless, doesn't matter if you're the busiest person in the lowest class of civilization or you're the busiest person in the highest class of civilization, both non-morally and morally. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that the person, I want you to go write, be able to in one page, or max 2 pages, write your whole life story in front of yourself and read those sentences and ask yourself, what now? And you'll recognize the overwhelmment of the unknown. You'll see that when creation is called forth, you see, for me, artists, they are incredible warriors of the mind. Artists, creative, what civilization, the mainstream considers to be creativity, even though it's limited their notion of creativity, but they acknowledge an incomprehensible way that an expression occurred. Okay? We are drawn to mystery. It's in our nature because evolution occurred through a sort of knowing. You see? In ancient Upanishads, I found parallels to this. It's funny, when you study a lot of ancient quotes, you begin to see people around the world. It's as if either ideas were moving around somehow, or in some sense, they were all growing in the same time, as if you planted the. Imagine, like, you know, in all the countries of the world, someone planted a seed. At the same time, they all planted the seed. So you kind of begin to see the intelligence sprouting everywhere in the same way. And for me, it's not that I doubt, but what I'm trying to say is that the objective self, I do not devalue it. I feel it's important to maintain it. I feel people who are not aware of survival, they don't understand what world they're in. You know, people who are just in their own bubble of comfort, you don't understand what world you're in. We're in a battlefield right now. We're not just in a battlefield with an elemental forces we have to deal with. We don't have to just deal with objective data that can, in some sense, do something to us. But at the same time, we have to deal with how objective data is being held in our eyes as subjectivity. You see, the way you see me, the way you hear my words, it's being your imagination and your intelligence. Okay? So I'm telling you, there's a dynamism, and thoughts can have different speeds. This is something I think no one perhaps ever has talked about. I don't even see it in ancient scripture. But I'm telling you, thought, subjective phenomena, has speed. And the reason it has speed is it's because its speed is like how fast you blink based on your heartbeat. Okay? Whew. Thoughts move too fast sometimes, you know. Um, as you become aware of your outer space, you come into terms. You come into terms means you come into agreement, which means you find contentment. That means it's like the first. I feel every child on this planet needs to do this. You need to go look in the mirror, and you're going to see something there, and you have to accept what you see in the mirror. Because if you don't, then you're not seeing yourself. You see what I mean? I feel the most immediate way insanity can be, in some sense, helped is that instead of the person being locked up in some sort of chaotic system, I haven't studied this that much, but I saw Michel, what is it, Michel? I saw Michel Foucault, Foucault, oh my God, how did they, Foucault, Foucault. Okay, this person, he's a very important, not important, he's a very notable scholar of life. I consider him a unique view on life. Okay, so he's a unique philosopher and great in his own right. But Michel Foucault said something in the sense of how man, in his search for trying to bring a new order to things, to civilization, has in some sense institutionalized nature. And what that means is not just the current institutions we find ourselves in, but has organized nature. Just like a kid organizes like his pencil case on his table or something, similar to a metaphor simply like that. We have organized the data of this world. And the way the world happens is waves are hitting us. This is why I feel communication must be preserved, especially between members of a species, in regards to people like being aware, trying to see how their comrades are doing it in the same battlefield. Okay, this battlefield we call life, or you can see it as a playground or battlefield, whatever you like. you know, you can see it simply, you can see it complexly, whatever steers your sight. Um, Very poetically, I can say a true philosopher is like a child in the lost and found section of not the mall, but the world. So the person, if it's the problem with beliefs, is that you're choosing to be too shaped in a dynamic world. The world changes. So how do we interpret change? By trying to see how our attention, in some sense, has to be changeless to observe change. You need both good and bad. Rumi said, good and bad are like the wings of the mind. They're the wings of a bird, like the wings of a bird, like the wings of your mind. Your mind flies through this existence between the good, the bad, the chaotic, the ordered, the complex, the simple. This world is neither heaven and it is neither hell, but it is something. And I feel the healthiest way to acknowledge it is that life is a work of art. Now, you can choose to crush this work of art, you can choose to change it, you can choose to make this work of art be bulldozers, destroying forests. I feel it's like when we care about life, we will free it from all its chains. And many of these chains are internal, but there are some that are external. And the enslavement of a society is that man and his society, his whole, not just nation, but the global community. Imagine in, let's say, in like, I don't know, like in, let's hope 50 years is too much. Let's say in 17 years, suddenly the politicians of the world suddenly are like, we hear them making an announcement to the whole world, and they are like, we are getting rid of the United Nations. And then the world was like, what the? And they're like, because we have realized the purpose of the United Nations was to unite the nations. But because we were all being individual nations with our own borders and just our own zones, how could we ever be united? So in some sense, how could you see your clear reflection in a broken mirror? You will see it in the parts, but not the whole. So what I'm trying to say is that imagine these politicians in 17 years from now come and say there is no longer a need for the United Nations. And what we have now become is the enlightened global community, where ideas or values as efficient pillars of civilization. That means when I give a talk, I don't want I don't want the future generations to just hear this. Do you see? For me, it's like, how does the intelligence move? In what ways are our minds echoing to us? When you look at someone, this is the most phenomenal thing. This is the uniqueness of what we call mind. And of course, for me, it has to be very clear. Before you can free yourself from anything outside, you have to free yourself within. You have to give yourself an opportunity to be able, okay, to be efficient. As individual efficiency advances to its peak, it will find itself existent and experiencing, in some sense, deeper dimensions and levels of uh, journeying blissfully in this reality by taking more responsibility. You know why knights were feared back in the day? Why knights, like a knight, had so much strength? Because of their inner structure. Because the knight was protecting the realm, the kingdom. That means the knight was like, this is something that nobody disturbs. He was a real defender, okay, of the conceived truth of the time. So what I'm trying to tell you is, it all depends on how easygoing a civilization is. If it's easygoing, then reality doesn't lead to complex problems. Ethics and morality, rather than becoming very unique things, we just acknowledge a sort of global philosophy. Let's call it Humanity 1.0. And Humanity 1.0 is this global philosophy of various ways that human beings can just become efficient by looking at what they're doing and wondering about the opposite, you know? As if the person is thinking of doing something that's not um, proper, and then suddenly realizes he can do the proper thing. You have to either expand your inner strength, or you have to, in some sense, you go the copy paste method, you know. But I find life is too short to just follow things. Okay, like what is this? What is this notion of a follower? You know, like what are people following? Can I know? In this ever-changing world, what are we following? It's more about an acceptance of the simplicity of our experience. And the moment we can accept the simple dimensions of our being, the complex dimensions automatically open up. You don't even, it says, it's like when the student is ready, the master appears. When the mind has attained, has cultivated, your consciousness and your free will have aligned for the first time to be also aligned with your body. When these three things become aligned, you become efficient. Okay? And it's your mind, you know, in some sense, your body. And how would I say it? Like, the true self is kept true by the what is untrue. It acknowledges. I believe atheists and theists are both looking at the same picture. They're looking at two different sides of a coin, though. Imagine this giant coin, okay, dividing the sight of theists and atheists, and they're just shouting at each other, from across this coin. So what I'm trying to say is that language evolves, and humanity 1.0 in some sense becomes the efficient call of action of individual activity. In yoga and meditation, I'll kind of, due to a lack of temporary lifetime, I will share it. When your mind becomes a polished mirror, you will suddenly snap out of a story way the world is working, a story modification of the world. You'll step out of your beliefs. When you step out of your beliefs, you will take a fresh breath of recognizing that your mind doesn't constantly have to be kept in a sort of mechanical pattern of conceptualization. Your mind can enter the same room, yet it can be in some other sector of the universe. The intelligence of the attention in some level works as waves, in another level works as particles. That means sometimes the ego seems to be the eyes of the universe looking through my eyes, and sometimes my ego seems to be just me and the story of who I am and what I've done, and just the personal dimensions of reality. A lot of the personal dimensions of reality, they're called personal. So imagine like you had a sphere around you, a sphere of light around you right now. Okay, let's say like a notion I've created is an idea, a concept. I have like my own book where I just various concepts I've made about life are just it. Okay. And in some sense, for me, the mind is very interesting because I don't judge it. I don't judge myself until I see the data. And when I try to look at the data of who I am, I come to see some part of this data is kept in an unknown way. When I see a part of my intelligence has unknown roots, suddenly I stop constantly shaping my beliefs. I become a person who is standing in the world before having a sort of purpose of an action. You're just looking at the beauty of nature. Nature is beautiful before the word beauty was created. It was the awe of how expression occurred. And so we, for some reason, our species has been obsessed with technology, and it's not a bad thing and it's not a good thing either, because for technology it would not matter. When AI stands superior to us, who dares tell 0 and 1 what to do? And so for me, a lot of pure living has to do with suddenly coming into a simple way of looking at life. So you usually have complex problem, and I believe your intelligence as a moment of being will suffer if it chooses to see itself complex and see a complex problem and constantly trying to out complex the problem. I feel sometimes answers that cannot be received that way. You're in a game with the unknown, you know? As if imagine this guy for 7 years of his life he was drawing the biggest artwork ever. He was making the biggest artwork that wasn't even finished till age 70. Suddenly, like out of nowhere, a meteor hit his artwork. And this farmer was shocked, and like this person was shocked and was like, oh my god, what is this? You know? And so people came to him and said, "How do you feel, old man? You know, a meteor has just destroyed this artwork that took 70 years to create. How do you feel?" And he said, "That meteor was the final touch of my artwork." And then that's what I'm trying to tell you. You don't know who you are, so you are out of fear, some weird fear. You're choosing to believe. Be playful with language. You know, Sri Ramana Maharshi, I consider him a kind of enlightened visionary. And this man says, "Let what comes come. Let what goes go. See what remains." And that's it. That's it. Acknowledge what's here, and you'll free yourself from illusion. When you come to see what's here, it's not just matter again. So it's a very strange point in our history. It's not that only religion is ancient and primitive. I find that the sciences today do not inspire enough momentum. That means science has to understand something that strangely religion did. Okay? So as if religious people are seeing something of the picture that they feel scientific pictures cannot encapsulate in their philosophy of existence. Okay? So let me tell you, because I've seen both sides. I've gone on binge watching these debates, you know. For me, I call it the war of language. The war of language is how, when you look at people's external ego and how it's being acknowledged in society, what you see, you see names glorified towards the ultimate unknown. When I looked at people, I'm like, holy shit, everybody is doing the same thing. We're just physical creatures making mouth noises. But where is the will coming from? Where is the intelligence of the person coming from? You know, and so that's when the ancient dusty idea of the soul, you take that book out and you begin to realize words are just a reflection of how well your mind can animate them, how much your mind has processed data, how much you have looked at this life and recognized it's looking back at you, you know, and in what way is it looking? How is the world moving? That means if you saw an exact, imagine you were this like unique animal photographer, this intelligent animal photographer, and so you started filming this thing about animals, you know, and so you suddenly saw an exotic animal, you know, in a safe distance, you saw this animal kind of move. You know, let's say a baby cub lion suddenly found the, you know, face of this camera, you know. You're going to see, just like how you would observe how the unknown non-threateningly moves, in some sense you begin to start studying the story of civilization in the same way. For me, political correctness in modern society is not a good sign. It's a sign of de-evolution of a culture, not a culture of a society. Let me tell you why. Because it is going to become an outlet for people's anger. That means when somebody says something the person doesn't like, his anger is like, now I have a chance to be free, and they just rage, you know? The subjective self, as it discovers the hollowness of the story in accordance to the objective self, nullifies, as if objects never had a soul and thoughts were never here, and so you're left the moment. You know, this is where rationality has nowhere else to take you aside from this. And irrationality is just the restructuring of your rationality. So you can say the rational mind functions in a waking conscious moment. That means when you try to make a rational decision, when you try to process data based on firm, acceptable, proven structures, it's kind of like when you're always using the past to build the future doesn't really feel like the future, you know? So in some sense, you have to kind of look at how the society and culture is behaving. Like that animal photographer, we are in some sense zooming in on the psychology of the species, and we're wondering, what is this efficiency? And again, I've said this in other talks. Imagine like you see a group of birds on YouTube rhythmically flying. I've seen a school of fish moving. you know and so species can harmonize and efficiently wave. So that means there can be a renaissance where, just like how the school of fish all move together in accordance to a field of intelligence, a wave. So we in some sense uh, integratively approach the unknown. In doing so, first liberate our inner realities to then evoke the external liberation. You know, so in some sense, you change your viewpoint, and then you see something more about the picture. Then you go do whatever you want. So you see, it's about self inquiry. It's about how much you recognize matter is like a mirror of what your mind puts in it. You see, this computer in front of me, we're calling it a computer. We're putting a subjective mask over an objective form. So this has suddenly become a computer, and that's a bottle, and that's, you know, my phone. So different things, like you see how words have become real because they're touched, they're put on real things. So we in some sense are living in a story, and our free will is going to feel it's too chaotic to consider the null. So in some sense, nihilism, it's very unique. Once you go into the box of nihilism, when you go under the blanket of nihilism, you think there's no meaning because you see nothing. You have a sage once said, somebody asked him, "Hey man, what can I do in this life? Like, what's the best thing to do?" Like, he asked the best question. And the sage looked at him and said, "There's only two things you can do in this life. You can either be true or be untrue." And so he looks at the guy and he says, "Be true, man, be true." And so to be true means to comprehend how emotions came from a change of self. A change of self that during the experience was experiencing its shift. It's like, imagine a butterfly with the memories of a caterpillar. And one butterfly comes to that butterfly. It's like, "Hey man, do you also remember how you were a caterpillar?" And that butterfly is like, "Yeah." So there's there can be deeper ways that intelligence is present, and believe it or not, I feel God is just another way of saying it's all one field of intelligence. Honestly, I feel that's it. And so we look at it in regards to our minds, in regards to consciousness. This is why I feel neurologists and psychologists are destined to share each other's work with one another. Liberation means a sort of realizing that the self was free and can be free. Okay? So right now you're in some condition. Like if I asked you, like, how do you feel about your moment, you'll have some way of analyzing your moment. So that value, that way you shape your moment, if you were to respond, you'd kind of see it's like, how would I say it? We are not thoughts because they come and go. What are we? No questions can be asked from the unknown. What remains? A silence, a stillness, an unborn presence. This unborn presence is the ultimate resolution of the mind. That means the destiny of your physical brain is in some sense to return to the earth. but the destiny of what else there is in the moment of intelligence is also destined to return. So in some sense, you can say it's very unique. I feel that, and of course, I'm very gracefully and compassionately speaking about this and respectfully, that when the human being transitions out of this life, the objective brain, any part of your whatever that, this is what could happen. The brain stops the simulation as it breaks. But if there is something else, the simulation is observed as it breaks. And that other self is not an attribute. It is for the first time, your mind is free, liberated, and your body is liberated. Your physical body is liberated when it returns to the earth. You see? When it returns to the earth, that means it becomes dirt. That means everybody's end goal is to be dirt physically. Unless your consciousness somehow through a technological miracle in some sense becomes preserved in a sort of eternal database or whatever, you know. So simple thoughts for a complex world, you know, or complex thoughts for a simple one. So as the moment constantly simulates personality, this simulation is being generated by sensory stimulus. So what is stimulating your senses to receive data? So when something is happening in the moment, that's kind of part of real objective data. Real objective data, you got to really be, it's got to be important. Like I want the species to have an alertness that the moment they see a comrade in the battlefield ill, they help the comrade, you know. In some sense, the collective will always by definition surpass the individual will. That means even though I could want the earth to move the other way, to turn the other way, to rotate the other way, in some sense the earth will continue to rotate the way it is. So you cannot push a building, but you can change your mind. By recognizing the mind has always been changing. You have just perhaps not noticed it because it's very easy to be busy with a story of a world that you constantly write. The story of your world can be endless. This is why Salvador Dali was very wise, this painter, this surreal painter. He said, don't fear perfection, you'll never reach it. I'm pretty sure he was at the bar when he said that. Yeah? You don't fear perfection and you see, whoa, the story of my life can endlessly go on. But what is the point of nature? It is contentment with natural forces. That means be in a sort of honor with your physical body. It doesn't matter what condition your physical body is, but in some sense honor how these particles, these atomic particles are being you. Zen Master Dogen tells us to walk as the Buddha did, study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to awaken to the nature of all things. Do you see how subtle it is? It is how your mind creates your level of freedom. And your creativity is based on how it's more a testament to how you are judging the value of your own creative existence. Certain civilizations back in the day, they were wise. They valued art. They tried to make their cities look beautiful, not like dusty streets. They made society something that would give value to people, not take the value of their life and feed it to a kind of like mechanical system uh, uh, of economical function. You see, it's one of those things where it's very fascinating. Sometimes the things going on this planet are so big that of course you can't change. You just quietly observe from a distance and wonder when life will change. And so and so it's very important how you walk, not just physically but internally. How your awareness is being the self right now. This can be an extremely peaceful relationship if you get to a level where your relationship with how you're being right now, where in Vedanta they would say conscious existence is bliss, Sat Chit Ananda. The existence of consciousness is bliss. Trust me, just acknowledge it. Acknowledge how you're present as a unique and very sophisticated evolutionary creature in regards to every other creature on this planet. Human beings won the lottery. And so this is important, even in Spider-Man movies we see with great power comes great responsibility. I don't know if that has to mean, shooting web at people. I don't understand why Spider-Man doesn't throw a web at the eyes of his opponent first. I think then the movie would be short, too short. You awaken to the nature of all things by recognizing that the self is actually the changing world. It is nature. There's an elegant, natural way you're here right now. Appreciate this, enjoy this. Your mind will surf in various waves on this world. That means there will come moments where you will suffer, but observe the suffering. There will come moments where you will be in utter joy. Observe those moments. You are the moment that continues. You are the eyes of mankind that has made it so far. And what shall you make to continue? While it's so important, the concept of reproduction and the concept of passing down a beacon that has been passed down for many generations. And I feel due to how the society has evolved, due to the exponential growth of technology, culture has had to adjust to ways of life where it's as if culture was that two young kids sent to war. Okay? I hope this talk has served you. These words come from an effort for me to communicate something new. I feel the world is a strange place because it can't be anything else. You know, I feel that we have to change our values as a civilization, or we will never see how efficient we could be. I feel we should change our values as a person, not to by consciously changing it based on the results of a battle or whatnot, an intellectual battle. But I'm telling you, it's more like you find the alertness of the ego that understood it can fly in the sky and observe all data at once, or it can in some sense go on the branch, a certain branch of knowledge and station itself there. Depends how the attention moves, and how the attention's movement is in some senses being accepted as how you're being. So I found myself in some sense comfortable with the notion of a multidimensional intelligence at the same time being simultaneously present with a singular dimension. That means we have two eyes that see the same, we have two hemispheres of our brain being the same mind. It is the mind is more a testament to the various compartments of the brain, because if the neurologist claims suddenly, like, just like how, what was it, Yuri Gagarin went into space and said, "I don't see any God here," you know, and it would be as if the neurologist would make such an important statement as him if he says, "I see no mind here in the brain." Okay, I don't see a mind in the brain. That would be as intense of a thing. And Friedrich Nietzsche in his grave would be like, "I told you so," because he has a quote where he says, "God is dead and we killed it." You know. And Friedrich Nietzsche is this very profound German philosopher. You'll notice something about all philosophers. Their relationship with language is a unique one. That's why their writings are, in some sense, for me, is when I read a Albert Camus had this sentence where it's like it was engraved in my, like, long-term memory because it was so incredible. And he said something like, "In the midst of winter, in the depths of winter, I found within me an invincible summer." Like, you see that word and you recognize the incredible ability of observance. And when a person observes thoughts more than objective phenomena, they become a philosopher. Their mind becomes philosophically oriented. When they observe objective data and objective reality more than subjective data, they become a scientist. So the world is divided between philosophers and scientists. Some of these philosophers are choosing to have their own unique story. Some of them are choosing to have a collective story, a religious story. And so it again will seem to the scientist as philosophical because there's nowhere else to go, because science is the only position that's claiming we are evidence of objective reality. For me, what I see from science is that I see a lot of scientists, and I feel science is incredible, but I feel the nomenclature of science needs to be updated, and it has to update through the subtler collective context of a sort of story that human beings can engage with. That means science shouldn't just be cool, just physically. It should also be liberating for the mind to know something you did not. It's as if a story of inspiration in a temporary journey. The world, I remember my poetic writings, I said something in my poetry, I said something where it was like, the world faces many faces, but many faces face the world, like something like that. Like, I intentionally tried to, in the most efficient way, write a sentence with the most faces in it. But aside from that silliness, the notion is that not only there is one world 8 billion beings are in, but there is 8 million dimensions to this world based on how each person is seeing it. So we are, a culture is going to always entertain a multidimensional notion of its presence. And when I say culture, what I mean is the more sophisticated expressions of inner knowing into outer behavior. It's all about pattern recognition and pattern abidance. Civilization and society is that kind of game. But in some sense, your own search, the rawness of the truth behind your eyes before conception could tell you what to see. You find the true presence of all the personalities that you have witnessed in this lifetime. You come to a moment that is enough before you do anything about it. Your mind suddenly, as the Zen saying says, your mind starts at the top of the mountain instead of the bottom. You start off at perfection, going towards imperfection, rather than thinking your imperfection going to perfection. When you think you're imperfection going to perfection, because you think you're imperfect, your mind will constantly see suffering. Like, it's like you're designing it that way. But if you think you're going from perfection to imperfection, this doesn't mean naivety or blindness. This means acknowledging that you can have your highest capability of ability. This means the way you're choosing to be a self can be redesigned by your awareness. It's very fascinating. I feel like there's so many books about the physical reality, but not enough books about the non-physical reality. I feel the genres of all books around the world should be designed like this. Rather than fiction and non-fiction, we say physical reality and non-physical reality. So we have a more real sense to it. That means the books are taking the attention of the people beyond the sky, beyond the clouds in the sky, and some books are taking people's attention to the center of the earth. Where, as Neil deGrasse Tyson very incredibly said in his Star Talk podcast, he said something where we should not go to the cave. We should not be, mankind's decisions shouldn't take him back to the cave where he stepped out of. It should take him beyond the stars. Our eyes should open up beyond just thinking that light is so conveniently here. This light is a rare opportunity. Just like how we need oxygen, we need light to see. We have light based on the nature of the world, being by design authorizing that expression. So you study it, your intelligence, and you see it as a reflection of how the world has treated you and how you have treated your sense of self after every battle, after every journey. Every day can be said to be a lifetime. You can be very playful with language. The true self stands beyond any frame, but it watches the various frames that come and go, the various ways that the texture of the moment gives it a value or is a value. So as your value system and your shifts, your data processing ability changes, you know. And if we just assume we're objective beings, our value system will there would be no free will. If you're matter and matter is moving by universal forces, there's no such thing as people. It's all a unique simulation. It's just the forces of nature moving matter. That's it. You know. So either, if objectivity will take you there, I don't know where else you could go. But in some sense, subjectivity commands depth. That means like the creative person says to the person who feels they're not creative, and so many people I've asked, "Are you creative?" And the guy says, "No." I'm like, "What is this?" How could a person in a creative world not be creative? Ooh. Rabindranath Tagore has this quote where he says, "You cannot cross the sea by merely staring at it." And Mr. Within is saying that in 2019, when I look at both Western and Eastern societies, we're just merely staring at the potential of the evolution of the species. It's no longer the evolution of an animal, it is the evolution of a civilization. The evolution of the civilization means some people are going to work with the past. Some people they're going to be drawn to the past. Some people are going to be drawn to the future, trying to preserve the future. Some people are going to be drawn to preserving the past. Live for life and you will live for life. It's beyond the language threshold. I personally find we are a memory for this universal sector. What has once been cannot be. What remains in attention continues. Much blessings and namaste.